What if I told you, the more you explain your pain, the weaker you actually become? Not because your pain is small, but because the wrong people are listening. Some people don't want to understand you. They want to study your weakness. And every time you open your heart to them, you give them more power over you. So the real question is, are you sharing your pain to heal, or to be seen by those who secretly enjoy it? And before we go deeper, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it in your city right now? Because what you're about to hear might change the way you deal with people forever. Not every listener is a safe place. There comes a quiet moment in life, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply revealing, when you finally begin to see people not by what they say, but by how they respond to your pain. At first, you don't notice it. You think sharing is connection. You think opening your heart is strength. You believe that if someone listens to you, they must care about you. But slowly, life starts showing you something different. You begin to feel a strange heaviness after certain conversations. You notice that after speaking your truth, you don't feel lighter. You feel exposed, not healed, but emptied. And that is your awareness trying to wake you up. Because in Buddhist understanding, awareness is the beginning of all transformation. And what you are starting to see is this: not every person who listens is a safe place for your truth. Some people listen with curiosity, not compassion. Some listen to gather information, not to offer presence. Some listen quietly, but inside, they are comparing your pain to theirs, judging your reaction, or worse, feeling a subtle sense of satisfaction. It is a painful realization, but also a necessary one, because the world is not filled with people who understand deeply. Most people are still trapped in their own mind, their own ego, their own insecurities. And when you bring your pain to them, they don't meet you with awareness. They meet you with their own unconsciousness. Buddha teaches that suffering does not only come from pain itself, but from misunderstanding reality. And the reality here is simple. You are expecting depth from people who have not yet gone deep within themselves. You are offering vulnerability to those who have not learned how to hold it. And every time you do that, you create more suffering for yourself, because instead of feeling seen, you feel misunderstood. Instead of feeling supported, you feel drained. Instead of healing, you feel like your pain has been scattered, misinterpreted, or silently judged. This is why awareness is so important. You must start observing people, not through their words, but through the energy they leave behind after you speak to them. Do you feel calm after opening up to them? Or do you feel restless, overthinking everything you said? Do you feel accepted? Or do you feel like you revealed too much to the wrong person? These subtle feelings are not random. They are signals. They are showing you who is aligned with your healing and who is quietly feeding on your vulnerability. And once you begin to notice this, you cannot unsee it. You will start recognizing patterns. The person who always asks about your problems, but never offers real presence. The one who listens carefully, but later uses your words against you, or shares them with others in a different form. The one who appears supportive, but you always leave their presence feeling smaller, not stronger. These are not coincidences. This is unconscious behavior. And Buddha reminds us, never expect awareness from the unaware. So what do? Do you stop trusting everyone? No. You become selective. You become aware. You stop giving your deepest truth to everyone who is simply available, because availability is not the same as emotional capacity. Just because someone is there does not mean they can hold you. And this is where your responsibility begins, because protecting your peace is not about changing others. It is about understanding them clearly and choosing where to place your energy. You are not meant to be understood by everyone. You are not meant to be open with everyone. Your pain, your story, your inner world, these are sacred. And sacred things are not meant to be placed in careless hands. So the next time you feel the urge to explain your pain, pause for a moment. Observe the person in front of you, not what they say, but who they are beneath their words. Ask yourself quietly, is this person aware enough to receive what I am about to share? Because if they are not, then your silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. And once you truly understand this, you will stop seeking comfort in the wrong places. You will stop opening your heart where it is not respected, and slowly, gently, you will begin to protect your energy, like someone who has finally realized its value. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves to hear your pain. And the moment you accept this, your healing truly begins. Explaining your pain keeps you trapped inside it. There is something very subtle, but very powerful, happening every time you explain your pain to someone. You think you are releasing it. You think you are letting it go. You think speaking about it will make you feel lighter. But in most cases, you are doing the exact opposite. You are repeating it, reliving it, refeeding it, and slowly, you are making it stronger inside your own mind. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the mind creates suffering, not just through what happens, but through what it keeps holding on to. And every time you tell your story again, you are telling your mind, this pain is important, keep it alive. So your mind listens. It holds on to the memory more tightly. It adds more emotion to it. It builds more thoughts around it. And before you realize, your pain is no longer just something that happened. It becomes something you carry, something you identify with, something you keep returning to, again and again, without even noticing. Now, here is where it becomes even more dangerous. When you explain your pain to the wrong people, they don't help you release it. They shape it. They add their opinions, their judgments, their limited understanding. They might say things that confuse you or make you doubt yourself. They might even make your pain feel bigger than it really is. And suddenly, your original experience is no longer clear. It becomes distorted, not because your pain changed, but because too many unconscious minds touched it. Buddha reminds us, clarity comes from within, not from outside noise. But when you keep seeking answers from others, especially those who are not aware, you move further away from your own understanding. You stop listening to your inner voice and start depending on external reactions. And this creates a deeper form of suffering, because now your peace is no longer in your control. It depends on how others respond to your story. If they agree, you feel validated. If they don't, you feel worse. And just like that, your emotional state becomes tied to people who were never meant to carry your truth. This is why Buddha speaks about detachment, not just from people, but from the need to explain everything, because the more you explain, the more you stay attached to the experience. And the more attached you are, the longer your suffering continues. So what is the shift? You stop repeating your pain. You stop narrating your wounds. Instead, you begin observing them. You sit with the feeling, without turning it into a story. You allow it to exist, without feeding it with words. And something begins to change. The emotion starts losing intensity. The memory starts losing its grip. Not because you ignored it, but because you stopped strengthening it. This is the difference between expression and awareness. Expression without awareness keeps you stuck. Awareness without constant expression sets you free. So, the next time you feel the urge to explain what happened, pause. Notice what your mind is trying to do. Is it trying to heal, or is it trying to repeat the same pain again? Because once you see this clearly, you will understand something very powerful. You don't heal by telling your story again and again. You heal when you stop giving your pain a voice and start giving your awareness the space to grow. And when that happens, your pain slowly fades, not because it disappeared, but because you finally stopped feeding it. Silence is your shield, not your weakness. There is a deep misunderstanding that most people carry throughout their lives, and it quietly shapes how they deal with pain, relationships, and their own inner world. And that misunderstanding is this belief that if you do not explain yourself, if you do not defend your emotions, if you do not constantly speak your truth out loud, then you are weak, misunderstood, or somehow losing control of your narrative. But in reality, according to Buddhist wisdom, the opposite is true, because true strength is not found in how much you reveal, but in how much you understand without needing to reveal it. When you begin to observe life more carefully, you will notice that the people who speak the most about their pain are often the ones who remain trapped inside it the longest, not because their suffering is greater, but because they are continuously feeding it with attention, with explanation, with repetition, and each time they speak it out, especially to those who are not truly aware, they are not releasing it, they are reinforcing it, they are giving it more space to live within them, and over time, this turns their pain into something that feels permanent, something that feels like a part of who they are, rather than something they are simply experiencing. Buddha teaches that awareness creates distance between you and your suffering, and that distance is where freedom begins. But every time you rush to explain yourself, you close that distance, you pull the experience closer, you step back into it, and instead of observing it from a place of clarity, you become entangled in it again. And this is why silence becomes such a powerful tool. Not because it hides your truth, but because it protects your awareness from being diluted by the noise of others. Think about this carefully. Every time you share something personal with someone who is not deeply aware, you are not just sharing your words, you are opening a doorway into your inner world. And once that doorway is open, their perceptions, their limitations, their unconscious reactions begin to enter, and they leave behind traces, subtle doubts, small confusions, quiet distortions that you may not notice immediately. But over time they begin to shape how you see your own experience, and slowly your original clarity starts to fade. This is why many people feel more confused after talking about their problems, even though they expected to feel better, because they allowed too many unaligned perspectives to mix with their own, and now their mind is no longer still. It is divided, pulled in different directions, trying to make sense of what others have said, instead of resting in its own awareness. Silence prevents this. Silence is not the absence of expression, it is the presence of protection. It is a conscious decision to keep your inner world clear, undisturbed, and aligned with your own understanding, rather than exposing it to every passing opinion or unconscious reaction. And when you begin to practice this kind of silence, something very powerful starts to happen within you. Your mind becomes calmer, your thoughts become clearer, your emotional reactions become less intense, not because your life has suddenly become perfect, but because you are no longer scattering your energy in every direction. There is also another truth that becomes visible when you embrace silence, and that truth is this. People who were comfortable with your constant explanations begin to feel uncomfortable with your stillness, because your silence removes their access to your vulnerability. It removes their ability to analyze you, to question you, to subtly position themselves above you by understanding your weaknesses, and when that access disappears, so does their sense of control. This is why silence often reveals more about others than words ever could, because when you stop explaining yourself, you start observing how people react to your lack of explanation. Some will respect it, some will feel neutral about it, and some will become restless, curious, or even slightly irritated. And these reactions are not random, they are reflections of their own inner state, their own need for control, their own attachment to your openness. Buddhist wisdom encourages you to observe without reacting, to see clearly without becoming emotionally involved in every external movement. And silence allows you to do exactly that. It creates space between you and the external world, a space where you can watch, understand, and remain grounded in yourself rather than being pulled into unnecessary emotional exchanges. Another important layer of this lesson is understanding that silence is not about suppressing your emotions. It is not about pretending you do not feel pain. It is about choosing where and how your emotions are processed. Instead of immediately externalizing them, you allow yourself to sit with them, to feel them fully, to understand their origin, their movement, their nature, and in doing so, you transform your relationship with your own mind. When you do this consistently, you no longer feel the urgent need to be understood by others, because you have already understood yourself. And that self-understanding is far more stable, far more peaceful than any temporary validation you might receive from outside. Over time, this practice changes your entire presence. You become less reactive, less dependent on external reassurance, more centered, more grounded. And people begin to sense this shift, not because you told them, but because your energy no longer carries the same urgency, the same need, the same openness that invites unnecessary interference. This is the true power of silence. It is not passive, it is not weak, it is not empty. It is active awareness. It is protection of your inner clarity. It is a boundary that does not need to be spoken. And once you truly understand this, you will no longer feel uncomfortable when you choose not to explain yourself. You will no longer feel the need to justify your emotions to those who are not capable of holding them. You will simply remain still, aware, and grounded in your own truth. And in that state, something very rare begins to emerge. A quiet strength that does not depend on words, a calm presence that does not need to prove anything, and a deep sense of peace that cannot be taken away by how others perceive you. Because you are no longer trying to be understood by everyone, you are simply understanding yourself. And that is where real freedom begins. When you stop explaining, you break the invisible control others have over you. There is a layer of truth that most people never fully see, not because it is hidden, but because it operates so quietly beneath everyday interactions that it feels normal. And that truth is this: every time you explain your pain to someone who is not truly aware, you are not just sharing information, you are unconsciously handing over a piece of your inner control. And the more you do this, the more your emotional state begins to depend on how that person receives, reacts to, or interprets what you have shared, which means that without realizing it, you slowly shift your center of stability from within yourself to outside of yourself. At first, this feels harmless, even comforting, because it gives the illusion that you are being seen, that someone is listening, that you are not alone in your experience. But beneath that surface, something much deeper is happening. Your mind begins to wait for responses. It begins to look for validation. It begins to measure its own experience through the reactions of others. And this is where the subtle form of control begins, not because the other person is actively trying to control you, but because you have created a space where their perception starts influencing your inner world. Buddhist wisdom speaks very clearly about this kind of dependency. It teaches that as long as your peace is tied to external conditions, whether it is people, opinions, or outcomes, you will remain in a constant state of instability. Because external conditions are always changing, they are unpredictable, they are influenced by factors that have nothing to do with your truth. And yet, when you keep explaining yourself, you allow these changing conditions to shape how you feel, how you think, and how you see your own experiences. This is why sometimes you feel calm after speaking to one person, but restless after speaking to another, even though the story you told was the same, because the difference was not in your pain, the difference was in how it was received. And this clearly shows that your emotional state was not rooted in your own understanding, but in the external reflection you received. And once you begin to see this pattern, you realize something important. The more you rely on others to process your pain, the less stable your inner world becomes. Now consider what happens when you stop explaining, when you consciously choose not to narrate your pain, not to seek immediate understanding, not to expose your inner world to every available listener. Something shifts, not outside, but within you. Your mind initially resists this. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like something is missing because it has become used to releasing tension through expression. But as you remain with that discomfort, as you stay present without reacting, a deeper awareness begins to form. You start to notice your thoughts more clearly. You begin to see how your mind tries to create stories, how it wants to justify, defend, and repeat certain experiences. And instead of following those patterns, you observe them. You allow them to arise and pass without turning them into words. And this observation creates space, a space where your awareness is no longer entangled with the need to explain. And in that space, your inner stability begins to rebuild itself. This is where control returns to you, not through force, not through suppression, but through understanding. Because now, your emotions are not being shaped by external reactions. They are being understood internally, and this internal understanding is far more stable, far more consistent than anything you could receive from others, because it is not dependent on changing perspectives. It is rooted in direct awareness of your own experience. There is also another dimension to this that becomes visible over time. When you stop explaining yourself, you remove the patterns that certain people have become used to, and this reveals something very interesting about human behavior. Many people are not attached to you, they are attached to the role you play in their life. And if your role has been someone who shares openly, who explains everything, who provides emotional access, then your silence disrupts that pattern. They may begin to ask more questions, they may show curiosity, or even subtle discomfort, because something they were used to is no longer available. And this reaction is not necessarily about you changing in a negative way. It is about them adjusting to the absence of access they once had. And in this moment, you are given a clear view of their true intention, whether they respect your boundaries or whether they are unsettled by them. Buddha encourages this kind of observation, not to judge others, but to understand them clearly, because understanding removes illusion, and once illusion is removed, you no longer feel confused about people's behavior. You see it as it is, without attaching unnecessary meaning to it, and this clarity protects you from being pulled into emotional patterns that do not serve your peace. Another important realization that comes with this practice is understanding that you do not need to control how others perceive you, because the moment you stop explaining, you also stop trying to shape their understanding of you. You allow them to think what they think, to interpret what they interpret, without feeling the need to correct or adjust their perception. And this is a significant shift, because it frees you from the exhausting cycle of constantly managing how you are seen. Most people spend a large part of their energy trying to be understood, trying to be seen in a certain way, trying to ensure that others do not misunderstand their intentions or their emotions. But this effort is endless, because every person sees through their own lens, their own experiences, their own level of awareness, and no amount of explanation can fully control that. So when you realize this, you naturally begin to let go of the need to explain. You begin to understand that your truth does not lose its value just because someone does not understand it. Your experience does not become invalid just because it is not acknowledged in the way you expected. And this understanding brings a quiet confidence, a grounded sense of self that does not rely on external agreement. At this stage, your interactions change. You speak less, but your words carry more clarity. You share less, but what you share is intentional. You react less, but your presence becomes stronger. And most importantly, your peace becomes less dependent on others. This is the essence of breaking invisible control. It is not about pushing people away or isolating yourself. It is about reclaiming your inner space, your emotional independence, your ability to remain stable regardless of how others respond. And this stability is what allows you to move through life with clarity rather than confusion, with awareness rather than reaction. So when you feel the urge to explain your pain again, remember what is really at stake. It is not just about speaking or staying silent. It is about where your control lies, whether it remains within you, grounded in awareness, or whether it is slowly being handed over to external reactions that you cannot control. And once you see this clearly, the choice becomes easier, not because silence is always comfortable, but because it protects something far more valuable than temporary understanding. It protects your inner freedom, your clarity, and your ability to remain centered in a world that is constantly trying to pull you outward. Detachment is not distance from people, it is freedom from the need to be understood. There is a level of truth that only reveals itself when you have suffered enough from being misunderstood, and that truth is this: your deepest exhaustion does not come from what people did to you. It comes from your continuous effort to make them understand what they were never ready to understand. And this effort is subtle. It hides behind your explanations, your emotional openness, your repeated attempts to express your truth in different ways, hoping that one day, somehow, they will finally see what you feel, recognize what you went through, and respond in a way that gives you peace. But the more you try, the more you begin to realize that this peace never fully arrives, because it was never meant to come from them. Buddhist wisdom points directly to this illusion and gently breaks it, not by telling you to stop caring, but by helping you see clearly that the need to be understood by everyone is itself a form of attachment. And like all attachments, it creates suffering, because it ties your inner state to something you cannot control, the awareness of another person, and awareness cannot be forced. It cannot be explained into existence. It cannot be created just because you expressed your truth more clearly. It arises within a person when they are ready, and if they are not ready, no amount of explanation will bridge that gap. This is where most people lose their energy. Without realizing it, they keep returning to the same conversations, the same explanations, the same emotional expressions, believing that more clarity in their words will create clarity in the other person's mind. But clarity does not come from words alone. It comes from awareness, and if awareness is not present, your words become noise, repeated, reshaped, reinterpreted, but never truly understood in the way you intended. And so, slowly, you begin to feel drained, not just emotionally, but mentally, because you are carrying two burdens at once: your original pain and the weight of trying to make others understand that pain. And this second burden is often heavier because it is endless. It has no clear resolution, no moment where you can say, now they understand completely, because even if they do understand partially, your mind continues to search for a deeper recognition, a more complete validation, and this search keeps you tied to them. Detachment begins at the exact point where you see this clearly, not as an idea, but as a lived reality, where you realize that your peace cannot be built on the understanding of others. It must be rooted in your own awareness, your own acceptance of what you experienced, your own clarity about what it meant for you. And when this shift happens, something within you begins to loosen. A tight grip that you did not even know you were holding starts to relax. You no longer feel the same urgency to explain yourself, because you are no longer seeking something from the other person. You are no longer trying to extract understanding from them. You are simply present with your own experience. And this presence is enough, not because others suddenly change, but because your relationship with their perception changes. You begin to see that people interpret everything through their own lens, a lens shaped by their past, their beliefs, their emotional capacity, and their level of awareness. And this lens is not something you can adjust from the outside. No matter how carefully you choose your words, no matter how many times you explain your intention, their understanding will always pass through that internal filter. And once you accept this fully, you stop trying to control it. This acceptance does not make you passive, it makes you free. Free from the constant cycle of explaining, clarifying, defending, and repeating. Free from the emotional dependency on whether someone gets you or not. Free from the subtle frustration that arises when your truth is misunderstood or minimized. And in this freedom, a new kind of strength begins to emerge, a quiet strength that does not need recognition, a grounded stability that does not require agreement, a calm presence that remains unchanged, even when others do not see you clearly. Buddha describes this as a form of inner liberation, where your mind is no longer pulled in different directions by external reactions, where your sense of self is not shaped by how others perceive you, but by your own direct awareness of who you are and what you have experienced. At this stage, your interactions become simpler, not because people around you have changed, but because you have stopped complicating your inner world by trying to align it with theirs. You speak when it is necessary, you remain silent when it is not, and, most importantly, you no longer feel the need to make everyone understand your journey. There is also a deeper peace that comes with this detachment, a peace that is not dependent on resolution, not dependent on closure, not dependent on someone finally acknowledging your pain in the way you hoped. It is a peace that arises from within, from the understanding that your experience is valid regardless of how it is perceived, that your truth does not lose its meaning just because it is not fully understood by others. And when this realization settles within you, something remarkable happens. You stop reopening old wounds just to explain them. You stop revisiting painful moments just to make them clearer to someone else. You stop carrying conversations in your mind about what you should have said or how you could have explained it better, because you see that none of it changes the essential reality of what you experienced. This is the moment where your energy returns to you. The energy that was previously scattered in explanations, in repeated conversations, in emotional efforts to be understood, begins to gather back within you, and this gathered energy creates a sense of inner fullness, a quiet completeness that does not need external confirmation. From this place, you no longer approach people with the same expectations. You engage with them as they are, not as you wish them to be. And this removes a large part of the friction in your relationships, because you are no longer trying to change their level of awareness. You are simply recognizing it and adjusting your openness accordingly. This does not mean you stop connecting with others. It means your connections become more conscious, more intentional, more aligned with your own peace. You share where there is understanding. You remain silent where there is not. And you do this without resentment, without frustration, because you are no longer attached to the outcome. And this is the essence of detachment in Buddhist wisdom, not withdrawal, not isolation, but a deep internal freedom from the need to be understood by everyone, a freedom that allows you to move through life with clarity, with stability, and with a sense of peace that is not shaken by misunderstanding. So when you feel that familiar urge to explain your pain once again, pause and look deeper, not at the situation, but at the need behind it. Ask yourself gently, what am I seeking right now? Is it understanding, validation, recognition? And then see clearly that none of these can fully come from outside in a stable way. They can only arise within you when you stop depending on others to provide them. And in that moment of clear seeing, you will naturally let go, not through force, not through resistance, but through understanding. And that understanding will bring you back to yourself, where your peace has always been waiting, untouched by how others perceive your story, untouched by whether they understand it or not, simply present, simply available, the moment you stop trying to find it somewhere else. True healing happens when you stop performing your pain and start understanding its nature. There is a very deep shift that happens in a person's life when they move from expressing their pain to understanding it. And this shift is not loud, it is not dramatic, it does not announce itself to the world, but internally it changes everything. Because until that moment, most people are not truly healing. They are simply performing their pain in different ways, sometimes through words, sometimes through reactions, sometimes through silent expectations that others will notice and respond. But beneath all of this, there is a subtle pattern of externalizing what should be understood internally, and this pattern keeps the mind in a continuous loop of suffering. When you constantly explain your pain, especially to those who are not deeply aware, you are not just sharing your experience, you are unconsciously turning it into a narrative that needs to be heard, validated, and acknowledged. And once something becomes a narrative, the mind starts to organize itself around it. It begins to repeat it, refine it, defend it, and over time, that narrative becomes a part of your identity, something you carry with you, something you return to, something that shapes how you see yourself and your life. Buddhist wisdom gently reveals that this identification is one of the core reasons suffering continues, because the mind does not only experience pain, it attaches to it, it holds it, it builds a sense of self around it. And the more you speak about your pain in a repetitive way, the more you strengthen that identification until it no longer feels like something that happened to you, but something that defines you. This is why many people feel stuck for years, not because their situation never changed, but because their relationship with their experience never evolved. They kept revisiting it through words, through explanations, through conversations that never led to deeper awareness, only to temporary relief followed by the same cycle again. Now consider what happens when you stop performing your pain, when you stop turning it into something that needs to be expressed outwardly again and again, and instead you begin to observe it directly, without immediately translating it into language, without shaping it into a story, without seeking someone to hear it. Something begins to open within you. At first, this feels uncomfortable, because the mind is used to releasing tension through expression. It is used to explaining, to narrating, to creating a sense of movement through words. But when you choose stillness instead, when you sit with the raw feeling without escaping into explanation, you begin to see the nature of your pain more clearly. You notice how it arises. You notice how it changes. You notice how it is not constant, even though it feels overwhelming at times. And this observation creates a separation between you and the experience, a separation that is not based on avoidance, but on awareness. And in that separation, something very important happens. You begin to realize that you are not your pain. You are the one who is aware of it. This realization is the beginning of true healing, because now, instead of feeding the pain through repetition, you are allowing it to exist without reinforcement. And when something is not constantly reinforced, it naturally begins to lose its intensity, not because it is suppressed, but because it is no longer being given additional energy through thought and speech. There is also a deeper layer to this process, one that becomes visible only when you stay with it long enough, and that is understanding that pain itself carries information, not in the form of words, but in the form of sensations, emotions, and patterns that can only be understood when you are fully present with them. When you keep explaining your pain, you stay on the surface level of the experience, the level of story, of events, of who did what and why it hurt. But when you stop explaining and start observing, you move beneath the surface into the direct experience of the feeling itself. And it is here that true insight arises. You begin to see the attachments that made the situation painful. You begin to understand the expectations that were not met. You begin to recognize the patterns in your own mind that amplified the suffering. And this understanding does not come from outside advice. It comes from direct observation, from being present with your experience without trying to escape it through explanation. Buddha emphasized this kind of direct awareness as the path to liberation, because only through seeing clearly can the mind release what it is holding. And when you see your pain clearly, not as a story, but as a process, something that arises and passes, you naturally begin to let go of it. Another important shift that happens at this stage is that you no longer feel the need to be seen in your suffering, because you are no longer identifying with it in the same way. You are not trying to prove that you were hurt. You are not trying to make others acknowledge your experience. You are simply understanding it. And this understanding is enough. This does not mean you never speak about your experiences. It means that when you do, it comes from clarity, not from the need to release tension or seek validation. Your words become fewer, but they carry more depth because they are grounded in awareness rather than emotional urgency. Over time, this practice transforms your entire relationship with yourself. You become more patient with your own emotions, more curious about your inner patterns, less reactive to external triggers, and more stable in your sense of self, because you are no longer dependent on others to process what you feel. This stability is what gives rise to true peace, not a temporary calm that depends on circumstances, but a deeper equilibrium that remains even when life presents challenges, because you have learned how to meet those challenges within yourself rather than immediately seeking external outlets. And in this state, something very quiet but very powerful happens. Your pain loses its ability to control you, not because it never arises again, but because when it does, you no longer feed it in the same way. You no longer turn it into a story that needs to be told. You simply observe it, understand it, and allow it to pass. This is the essence of moving from performance to understanding, from expression without awareness to awareness without unnecessary expression, from repeating your pain to seeing through it. And when you reach this point, you realize something that changes everything. Healing was never about finding the right person to listen to you. It was about becoming aware enough to listen to yourself in a way that transforms your relationship with your own mind. So the next time you feel the urge to explain your pain once more, pause and look deeper, not at the situation, but at your own intention. Are you trying to heal, or are you repeating a pattern that keeps the pain alive? And in that moment of clear observation, you will have a choice: to continue the cycle or to step out of it and move into a deeper understanding. And that choice, made again and again, is what slowly leads you out of suffering and into a state of awareness where your peace is no longer dependent on expression, but rooted in understanding. When you no longer need to explain your pain, you enter a state of inner freedom that nothing can disturb. There comes a point in your inner journey where something shifts so deeply that it changes the way you relate to everything: your pain, your past, your relationships, and even your own mind. And this shift does not happen suddenly. It is built slowly through awareness, through observation, through the repeated choice of silence over unnecessary explanation, until one day you notice something different within yourself, something that was not there before, a quiet stability, a grounded presence, a sense that you no longer feel the same urgency to be understood, to be heard, to explain what you feel in order to feel complete. At this stage, you begin to see that your need to explain your pain was never just about communication. It was about seeking something deeper, a form of recognition, a sense that your experience mattered, that it was valid, that it deserved to be acknowledged. And while this need is natural, it becomes a source of suffering when it turns into dependence, when your sense of peace becomes tied to whether or not others can understand what you went through. Because the truth is, most people will never fully understand your inner experience, not because they do not care, but because they can only perceive through their own level of awareness. Buddhist wisdom reveals that true freedom begins when you no longer depend on that external understanding to feel at peace, when your validation comes from your own clarity, your own awareness, your own direct experience of what you have lived through. And this is not something you can force. It arises naturally when you stop scattering your energy through constant explanation and begin to gather it within yourself through observation and understanding. As you continue on this path, you begin to notice how much of your past suffering was not just about what happened, but about how long you kept carrying it, how often you revisited it, how many times you explained it, reshaped it, tried to make others see it the way you saw it, and this repeated engagement kept the experience alive in your mind long after the actual event had passed. And once you see this clearly, something within you lets go, not because you are trying to forget, but because you no longer feel the need to hold on to it in the same way. There is a deep sense of release that comes with this realization, a feeling that you are no longer bound to your past in the same way, that your experiences no longer define your present state, and this release is not dependent on closure from others, not dependent on apologies, not dependent on someone finally understanding what you felt. It is entirely internal, arising from your own awareness that you no longer need anything outside of yourself to validate what you have already seen clearly within. In this state, your relationship with people also changes in a very subtle but powerful way. You no longer approach them with the same expectations. You do not look for them to understand you completely. You do not feel the need to explain your emotional world in detail. You engage with them as they are, at their level of awareness, without trying to change it, and this removes a significant amount of tension from your interactions because you are no longer trying to align their perception with your truth. This does not make you distant or disconnected. It makes you balanced. You are still capable of deep connection, but your connection is no longer based on dependency. It is based on presence, on mutual awareness, on a natural flow that does not require constant explanation to sustain itself. And when someone does not understand you, it no longer creates the same disturbance within you because your sense of self is no longer tied to their perception. There is also a deeper layer of freedom that emerges here, one that goes beyond relationships and touches your entire way of being, and that is the freedom from the need to constantly define yourself through your experiences. When you are no longer explaining your pain, you are no longer reinforcing an identity around it. You are not repeating the same narrative that keeps you tied to a certain version of yourself. And without that repetition, your identity becomes more fluid, more open, less constrained by the past. Buddha describes this as a form of awakening, where you begin to see that the self you thought you were is not fixed. It is a collection of experiences, thoughts, and patterns that can change when you stop holding on to them. And when you stop explaining your pain, you stop solidifying it into your identity. You allow yourself to move beyond it, to grow, to evolve, to become something that is not limited by what you once experienced. Another important aspect of this stage is the deep peace that arises from within, a peace that is not dependent on circumstances, not dependent on people behaving a certain way, not dependent on your life being perfect, but a peace that comes from the understanding that your inner state is no longer controlled by external factors, that you have the ability to remain stable regardless of what happens around you, because you are no longer reacting in the same way. You are observing, understanding, and allowing things to pass without attaching to them. This does not mean you become emotionless. It means your emotions no longer dominate you. They arise, they are felt, they are understood, and then they pass, without leaving the same lasting imprint, because you are no longer feeding them through constant explanation and repetition. You are allowing them to move through you naturally. Over time, this creates a sense of lightness, a feeling that you are not carrying as much weight as before, not because your life has become easier, but because you have stopped holding on to unnecessary burdens. You have stopped carrying the need for others to understand you. You have stopped carrying the repetition of your pain. You have stopped carrying the identity that was built around those experiences. And without these burdens, your mind becomes clearer, more open, more at ease. This clarity also allows you to see others more clearly, without projecting your expectations onto them, without assuming they should understand you in a certain way, without feeling hurt when they do not meet those expectations. You see them as they are, with their own limitations, their own level of awareness, and this understanding creates compassion, not attachment, a quiet acceptance that does not require you to change them or explain yourself to them. And in this space of clarity and compassion, your life begins to flow differently. Your decisions are not driven by emotional reactions, but by awareness. Your actions are not driven by the need for validation, but by inner alignment, and your presence becomes something stable, something grounded, something that is not easily shaken by external circumstances. This is the state where your power fully returns, not as something forceful or dominating, but as a quiet, steady presence that does not need to prove itself, that does not need to explain itself, that simply exists in its own clarity, its own understanding, its own peace. So when you look back at where you started, at the times when you felt the need to explain your pain to be understood, to be seen, to be validated, you realize that it was part of your journey, not something to regret, but something that helped you see what does not lead to true peace. And through that seeing, you found a different path, a path of awareness, of silence, of understanding. And now, standing in this new state, you understand something that cannot be taken away from you. Your freedom was never in making others understand you. It was in understanding yourself so deeply that you no longer needed them to. And that is the moment where suffering begins to fade, not because life becomes perfect, but because you are no longer creating unnecessary suffering through attachment, through repetition, through the need to explain. You have stepped beyond it, into a space where your peace is your own, untouched, steady, and quietly complete. So now, take a moment and be completely honest with yourself. How many times have you explained your pain, hoping someone would finally understand you? How many times have you opened your heart, only to feel more empty afterward? And how many times did you already know they were not the right person to hear it, but you still spoke anyway? This is where your awakening begins. Not when people change, not when they finally understand you, but when you stop needing them to. Because the truth is, your pain was never meant to be explained to everyone. It was meant to be understood by you. And the moment you stop scattering your energy, stop repeating your wounds, stop seeking validation from the unaware, something powerful happens. Your mind becomes still. Your emotions become lighter. Your presence becomes stronger. You no longer feel the need to prove your truth, because you are finally living in it. And from that space, you don't chase understanding anymore. You become it. So from this moment forward, protect your inner world. Not everyone deserves access to your silence. Not everyone deserves to hear your story. Some things are meant to stay within you until they transform into wisdom. And when they do, you won't feel the need to explain anything anymore, because your peace will speak louder than your words ever could. If this message reached you at the right time, write in the comments, "I choose silence, I choose peace." And remember, you don't heal by being heard by everyone. You heal when you finally learn to hear yourself.